Check, check, audio check. Is this thing working here? All right. Audio check. Let's see what we got here. Audio check. All right, if you can hear me. Hey, Sean. What's up? Thank you for joining here. Our real quick live update here late at night of Hurricane Melissa's second landfall. This one in eastern Cuba, which she's pretty much doing right now, just a few minutes away from making landfall here. Melissa has survived her passage across Jamaica fairly well. Earlier, a couple hours ago, she regained Category 4 intensity briefly before coming back down to a high-end Category 3 with winds of 125 miles per hour and a minimum pressure of 952 millibars, as you see on your screen there. And she is now making landfall in eastern Cuba. But it is a significant development here because she is making landfall almost directly over the city of Santiago de Cuba, which is the second largest city on the island of Cuba. So this is a fairly big deal here. They're right now in the eye wall, right here. Okay, Santiago de Cuba, right here. That's where the city is. And they are currently getting slammed by this Category 3 eye wall. So, of course, nothing like what we saw earlier in Jamaica, right? This is a disheveled and relatively disorganized Category 3 hurricane, not this super ultra Category 5 record-breaking thing. Obviously, you can see the eye is not too well defined. You can tell where it is, right? But it's not too well defined, not doing great at the moment. Feeling those mountains of eastern Cuba here in the last moments, which is why Melissa came down from a low-end Cat 4 to now back to a high-end Category 3, but still a very significant landfall. So again, Santiago de Cuba, big population center there, and they are getting some very serious tropical conditions here. Why late at night, Sean? Well, I can't control the hurricanes and when they decide to make landfall, so that's why we've chosen to go live here. Might have gone live a little bit earlier, but, you know, you had stuff to do, so I can't win them all, can you? But, yeah. So, that's what we're looking at here. Santiago de Cuba getting hit pretty hard here with a large Category 3 Hurricane Melissa. She has expanded in size since her landfall in Jamaica. For perspective here, this was where, wow, I can hardly see that myself. Okay, so this is where she made landfall in Jamaica with estimated winds of 185 miles per hour and a minimum pressure of 892 millibars, which of course made her the most powerful landfalling Atlantic hurricane on record, tying with the 1935 Labor Day hurricane. So it was the strongest landfall, or at least most intense landfall pressure-wise in the Atlantic basin in 90 years. And Melissa also tied Hurricanes Dorian, so Dorian in 2019 and the Labor Day hurricane, is the strongest landfalling Atlantic storm by wind speed, which was 185 miles per hour. But anyway, so earlier today at 1 p.m. Eastern, Melissa made landfall here. And now she's all the way up here. Continuing onward, still a very powerful, pretty well organized system that is packing a definite punch. That's about 160 miles. So Melissa, 160 miles northeast of where she made her first landfall. And the most significant impact so far that we've seen here, and if you go to, I recently reposted a video on my X feed, serious flooding, pretty serious flooding over 3 hours ago. Okay, so very serious, so footage of flash flooding in Santiago de Cuba over 3 hours ago. And that was just from the outer edges of the central dense overcast, the torrential rains here contained inside all of these cold cloud tops. Melissa's still hanging on to her CDO quite well here. And we were already seeing some pretty serious flooding there in Santiago de Cuba, confirmed footage over 3 hours ago. And now the rains have only been getting heavier since then, of course. And now they are in the eye wall too. So now you're facing torrential rain and super strong damaging winds, likely taking out power there too. A lot of people live in Santiago de Cuba. Again, second largest city on the island of Cuba. Looks like we're going to have an update here. See some more people joining the stream. Thank you for joining. We are tracking Hurricane Melissa's second landfall. This one a Category 3 strength in eastern Cuba. She's
Statement from the National Hurricane Center.
Oh.
Satellite and radar imagery indicate that Melissa has made landfall in the Cuban province of Santiago de Cuba.
There we go. We officially have landfall. Okay. All right. Let's post. So give me a second here to post that update. But wow, we got on just in time. So there we have it. Let's see if there was an update in the intensity. Yes. Okay. So maximum sustained winds at landfall here down slightly to 120 miles per hour. So there we have it. Landfall over Santiago de Cuba, eastern Cuba. Category 3 Hurricane Melissa, winds of 120 miles per hour. And again, even though this is not nearly as powerful as what we saw earlier in Jamaica, of course, this is still a very strong, very potent system, very large. It's possible storm surge flooding, though we can't say that for certain, but definitely feels like that's a potential here, especially on the eastern eyewall quadrant. That is really hitting Santiago de Cuba hard. Again, that is the second highest population center on the island of Cuba. More importantly, though, is the heavy rainfall, which over 3 hours ago, we were already seeing some pretty nasty street flooding in Santiago de Cuba from Melissa's heavy rainfall. Now the rain is getting even worse. And man, this is just going to be raining over eastern Cuba as Melissa continues northeastward and eventually enters the Atlantic Ocean. You're looking at eastern Cuba and a lot of the mountains here, they're going to be in this heavy rainfall for a while. So let me post this update here that we officially have landfall from the National Hurricane Center. Made that just in time, did we? Yes, we did. All according to plan, of course. There we go. Definitely flooding. So this is a very dangerous storm. Any major hurricane is very dangerous. Especially one with the leftover energy that Melissa has. And rainfall, 100% the biggest problem here. Street flooding already for several hours now in Santiago de Cuba. Okay. Getting a satellite loop of that landfall now. We got another report coming in here from Spinny. Let's hear it.
Quotes from Sky News. Cuba is facing flooding and severe winds ahead of Hurricane Melissa's re-strengthening to making landfall there. More than 735,000 people have been evacuated, according to the Cuba's president.
Whoa, 750,000 people have been evacuated from eastern Cuba? Oh, you know what? I did see that somewhere else. Maybe not that specific value. I did see, though, that there were big-time evacuations going on in eastern Cuba in anticipation of this landfall here. Let's look real quick at what the National Hurricane Center had to say about this. $735,000 evacuated in eastern Cuba ahead of Hurricane Melissa. Did I say something differently? First time? 735,000? 735,000 people evacuated. So Cuba took this, sounds like, very seriously. Big time rainfall now ongoing in these mountains in eastern Cuba, where we could see isolated totals of 16 plus inches. That's what the National Hurricane Center is warning of for this event here. And wow, now that eye is really moving inland. Looks like we had landfall just west. So here's Santiago de Cuba, so maybe just west of the city. But that is resulting in them getting hammered by that eastern eye wall. Initially, Melissa was not forecast to get anywhere near Santiago de Cuba, but after leaving Jamaica, we definitely saw the storm take an eastward shift and an eastward jog, and that's how we've ended up where we are now, where Santiago de Cuba is getting hit really, really hard by this system. So the National Hurricane Center's official messaging here in their last forecast discussion for eastern Cuba was life-threatening storm surge, flash flooding, and landslides, and extremely damaging hurricane winds are likely through Wednesday morning. Seek safe shelter now. So that's pretty. That's a pretty serious language there. Again, like Cat 3s, major hurricanes, of course. They are all have major impacts.
Post from @Climate Hurricane Melissa makes landfall in Santiago de Cuba as a Category 3, with winds of 205 kilometers per hour. Weather station in Guantanamo records accumulated rainfall up to now of 104 millimeters.
104 millimeters of rainfall recorded in Guantanamo Bay. Again, severe freshwater flooding has already been ongoing in eastern Cuba for hours now. And extremely dangerous hurricane conditions now cruising inland through eastern Cuba. This is a big deal, big time major hurricane landfall here. Now, luckily, most of these areas, other than Santiago de Cuba, obviously, which is a major city, most of the areas around that city are relatively rural. Sean asking, is she even bigger? I think he means perhaps bigger than last time. And yes, Melissa has grown in size in accordance with her weakening of after traversing the island of Jamaica. But definitely a dangerous situation here with life-threatening storm surge possibly ongoing. You can see there where we would likely see the most of that surge on the eastern side, where that onshore flow is, and that includes Santiago de Cuba, which is right there. Man, oh man. So let me finish this update up completely here. Life-threatening storm surge, flash flooding, landslides. All of that is on the table here tonight, or this morning, I guess. Another update coming in.
952 millibars. Residents should remain in a secure shelter and not venture outside in these life-threatening conditions. Additionally, more than a foot of rain is expected, with some areas potentially receiving over 16 inches. Stay safe, everyone.
Wow. So over a foot of rain may be still to come here for areas in Cuba. Big time rain here, especially with these, look at these blowups of these even colder cloud tops likely being caused by the steep terrain here in eastern Cuba. So 12, 15 inches of rain total, maybe even still to come here. And that's not too hard to imagine. You can see here with Melissa, all of this very heavy rain trapped in this central dense overcast, which is still very cold, very impressive. Okay, I want you to look at this. Think about how impressive, really, this storm still is, even though she's weakened well off her Category 5 peak. These cloud tops still maxing out the scale down here on the southern quadrant. So we're still getting arcing convective bands that are maxing out the infrared spectrum of cloud top intensity. Okay, let me pull up my tabs again. Okay, there we go. All right, I lost my tabs there for a second, but we're good. We're good. So this is still, I mean, look at how big this is. Okay, so the cloud shield here. Look at this. Whoa. The cloud shield for Melissa, there you can see still looking very intense on water vapor, is very impressive. To the north, it extends over 430 miles. Now, in terms of the central dense overcast cloud shield, that's about 170 miles across. And then the extent of the winds how far do the hurricane force and tropical storm force winds extend out from the center? Hurricane force winds extend outward up to 30 miles from the center of Hurricane Melissa, and tropical storm force winds extend outward up to 195 miles. So there you go. So from the center, there you go. So that blue circle right there, that's showing you the extent of the hurricane force wind. So if you're in that blue circle right now in Cuba, you are likely experiencing sustained winds of hurricane force. And then, of course, if you're in the eye wall, which is smaller than that hurricane force wind field, but if you're in the eye wall, then you're experiencing the Category 3 force winds, which is probably a little bit narrower of a band. But nevertheless, there you have it. So this blue circle is where those hurricane force winds are. Hurricane force winds always bring significant impacts. And then the tropical storm force winds, that they are really out there. Look at this. So that is how far right now, that's how big Melissa is technically based on the National Hurricane Center's advisory. That's how far tropical storm force winds extend outward from the center. You see that's stretching out beyond the cloud shield of Melissa. So a pretty large system. Which is why we have this ongoing risk In the National Hurricane Center's own words, life-threatening storm surge, landslides, and flash flooding, and damaging winds here now in eastern Cuba.
Vortex WX. Melissa has now made a second landfall near Chivarico, Santiago de Cuba, with winds of 120 miles per hour and pressure of 952 millibars. This is the strongest tropical cyclone to hit the province since Inez 66, the strongest TC to hit the province in October since Hurricane 4 in 1884, and the strongest hit Cuba since Matthew in 2016. Melissa will chug inland, bringing destructive winds, high storm surge, and heavy rain in East Cuba.
Wow, so some pretty fascinating records there. If we look at the historical precedent for eastern Cuba, which was mentioned there, again, kind of like Jamaica, eastern Cuba here, at least from the south, has not been hit with as many major hurricanes as you'd imagine. You know, if someone asked you, hey, you know, how many major hurricanes have hit this area? Not as many as you would think. So there you go. In terms of these three provinces down here, at the very eastern edge of Cuba, the last major hurricane to make landfall in this area was Matthew in 2016. He clipped the eastern edge, really the easternmost tip of Cuba in 2016. Of course, you had Sandy make landfall in almost this exact same spot, and obviously taking the most similar track, right? Sandy crossing Jamaica as a hurricane and then making landfall as a major hurricane here in eastern Cuba. Oh, here we go. Rokai asking, landfall in Cuba. Yes, Rokai, we have landfall in Cuba. Here was the satellite presentation at the time of landfall. Here is the eye. And here is the major city of Santiago de Cuba. Who are, in all likelihood, getting slammed by the full force of the major hurricane eye wall, of the major hurricane winds of Melissa's eye wall. Excuse me. So they're right there, right? They're right on the eye wall. The eye made landfall just to the west of the city. We've already seen footage of severe street flooding there in Santiago de Cuba over 3 hours ago. Okay, and that was just from the rainfall from the outer bands of Melissa and the outer edges of her central dense overcast, which is now completely over the city and now moving inland over eastern Cuba. And in the language, the National Hurricane Center officially warning that through the rest of Wednesday morning for eastern Cuba, they could experience life-threatening storm surge, flash flooding, and landslides, and extremely dangerous, extremely damaging hurricane winds. And they are saying that that's going to persist through the morning, obviously, across eastern Cuba. And so we're talking about the rainfall for sure and the landslide threat because there's a lot of mountains here, but also let's not forget the storm surge. Here's the onshore push on the eastern side of Melissa. This is where you would be getting the storm surge. Where you're seeing that onshore flow. Maybe 9 feet of storm surge, I would say, maybe as a maximum. Rokai also coming, wow, just continuing to show off. And indeed, Melissa is doing that. She came off of Jamaica, obviously weakened, but not quite as weakened as I was initially expecting. Now she only re-intensified very briefly, so there were warm waters. The conditions were favorable. She did look like she was going to make another run for maybe a mid-range Category 4 strength level. She only ended up re-attaining Category 4 strength briefly and as a low-end strength storm. So, and then as she got closer here rapidly to the mountainous coastline of eastern Cuba, she then started to weaken a little bit, and then ultimately she made landfall with winds of 120 miles per hour, 952 millibars. But of course, it's still a major hurricane, still very, very dangerous. And the size of the system pertaining to both her storm surge and the ongoing rainfall in this part of Cuba, 100% the most concerning factor with some locations here, especially the mountainous ones that could experience 10 plus more inches of rain. That's a very frightening thought. So yes, we just had landfall here tonight at 3 a.m. Eastern time, 3 a.m. local time. Big lumbering system Melissa has become. And again, looking at the historical precedent here, much like Jamaica hasn't been hit with quite as many major hurricanes as you'd expect, neither has eastern Cuba from the south. The last storm to do so was Matthew in 2016. He clipped the easternmost tip of Cuba. Sandy made landfall as a major hurricane, of course, and did big time damage in this same area, right? So that kind of tells you what we could be looking at here, because Sandy was a bad storm for Cuba, even though she was only a Category 3. She was a very damaging Category 3 long before she became Superstorm Sandy, the big nor'easter for the New England and the east coast of the United States. Well before that, she turned out to be a very damaging Category 3 hurricane for Cuba, and she made landfall in almost the exact same spot. So here was her peak intensity, briefly reaching Cat 3 before making landfall just west of Santiago de Cuba, just like Melissa has here. And then, of course, Sandy went up and did this craziness, becoming the superstorm that went into New England, the highly destructive one. Dennis in 2005, he clipped the westernmost tip here of this boot, right? This boot that that represents the eastern portions of Cuba. And then you have to go all the way back to 1966. Inez made landfall here over Santiago de Cuba as a major hurricane, and Flora in 1963 making landfall here as a Category 3, basically over Guantanamo. And Flora, of course, here, as you can see with this track, Flora, of course, a legendarily horrific Atlantic hurricane, one of the deadliest ever recorded, and you can see why. She made a Category 4 landfall over the Tiburon Peninsula of Haiti, destroying whole villages with not just with her extreme high-end Category 4 winds, right? You can see 130 knots there. So that's high-end Category 4, borderline Category 5, but also with all her rain bands really affecting the entire country of Haiti. And then the second equation to what made Flora in 1963 one of the deadliest Atlantic hurricanes of all time, at least 7,000 fatalities Flora caused in the Caribbean, is then she made a Category 3 level landfall here in eastern Cuba, and then very slowly crawled across the eastern end of the island, re-emerged back out into the Caribbean Sea, re-intensified briefly to a Category 2, because why not, and then made a second landfall and literally looped all the way back around. So literally, as you can see, this is just the craziest track ever. And because of that, Flora dumped days and days and days and days and days of rain, absolutely just honestly biblical amounts of rain in eastern Cuba. One of the wettest tropical cyclones, Atlantic hurricanes of all time. Now, of course, fortunately, we don't expect Melissa to do that. She's going to be heading quickly out into the Atlantic Ocean in a way. She's not going to be doing stalling loops and stuff like that. But still, the chances for life-threatening flash flooding and landslides very real, even with just 10 to 15 inches of rain. Rokai asking, crazy how it just sat in front of Jamaica versus the speed to Cuba. How fast is it now? Yes, exactly. So when Melissa was south of Jamaica and she was undergoing her rapid intensification and then her slower, more incremental intensification when she was at Category 5, she averaged about 3 to 4 miles per hour, her forward speed, which kind of changed between west and northwest. So she was very nearly stalled over the extremely warm waters of the Caribbean Sea during her intensification phase, moving at 3 to 5 miles per hour. Now, let me get a new... Now she's moving at 10 miles per hour. So that's not too fast, right? That's still on the lower end of forward speed for a tropical cyclone, but not 3 to 5 miles per hour. And so she is moving it. But still, 10 miles per hour is really slow. And that's why the flooding risk in eastern Cuba is so great. So we've covered this here, this ongoing landfall here in eastern Cuba. Started the stream, and boom, we have official confirmation of landfall from the National Hurricane Center. But of course, we cannot neglect the fact what Melissa did before this landfall. So, can't imagine anyone's missed it here. And by the way, I see we have 14 people watching in the middle of the night. You guys are crazy. You guys are crazy. Thank you for joining the stream, though. Thank you for liking the stream, Rokai. Thank you for the coverage. Absolutely. So this is the second landfall here of Melissa during her lifetime, her second one at major hurricane intensity. But the first one, which occurred at 1 p.m. Eastern time earlier today, was much, much different, as dangerous and potentially damaging as this one is. So here was the satellite image earlier today of Hurricane Melissa's landfall on western Jamaica. She made landfall with sustained winds of 185 miles per hour and a minimum pressure of 892 millibars. Her landfall location was near New Hope, Jamaica. And those values, those extreme high-end Category 5 values, 892 millibars, that tied Melissa with the 1935 Labor Day hurricane, which happened 90 years ago. Oh, man. Something caught my eye. Anyway, the Labor Day hurricane, which happened 90 years ago, used to solely have the record for the most intense landfalling Atlantic hurricane ever recorded. Also, most intense landfalling tropical cyclone in the Western Hemisphere. Well, the Labor Day hurricane, after 90 years exactly, now has company, and it is Hurricane Melissa. Her landfall in Jamaica earlier today, nothing short of historic, and was unfortunately catastrophic. But yeah, so tied the Labor Day hurricane with the most intense Atlantic landfall in terms of pressure, and also tied the Labor Day hurricane as the overall third most intense Atlantic hurricane ever recorded. The only two Atlantic hurricanes that were had a lower pressure than Melissa did today at peak intensity was Hurricane Wilma in 2005 with an 880 millibar peak intensity, and Hurricane Gilbert in 1988 with an 888 millibar peak intensity. So in other words, Hurricane Melissa essentially maxed out the maximum potential intensity a tropical cyclone could theoretically become over the Caribbean Sea. She became one of the most powerful Atlantic hurricanes of all time, as I just said, but also her satellite presentations and the fact that there was, and yes, you're reading that right on your screen at the top, a 252 mile per hour wind gust recorded by a Hurricane Hunter dropsonde at peak intensity right at or right before landfall there in Jamaica, as you can see on that insane satellite loop. Okay, so based on that, based on the satellite presentation and the fact that we were seeing some of the highest and most extreme values, both by dropsonde and by the Hurricane Hunter aircrafts themselves, the wind speeds coming back were absolutely unhinged, I guess is the best word to use for it. And because of that, there is good reason to believe that Melissa was really all things considered, one of the more powerful tropical cyclones we've ever witnessed in the modern era. And also another note, another very notable record she broke was having the driest eye ever recorded by satellite by, globally, right? So she broke the global tropical cyclone record for having the driest eye. What does that mean to have a super dry eye? The drier the hurricane's eye, the more extreme the force of sinking air and subsidence in the eye is. That subsidence causes a drying and warming effect which evaporates all the clouds, hence why hurricane eyes are clear. And there, of course, you can see on that satellite image just an extreme satellite presentation there on visible imagery. And you can see that how crazy that eye was, that 892 millibar eye. Literally can see all the way down to the ocean surface, and then the surface of Jamaica when it fully crossed shore, when it made landfall in that historic moment. So that's what we witnessed earlier today. Melissa now making landfall in eastern Cuba is a Category 3 that happened just moments ago. But this loop right here, this was the scene at 1 o'clock, just over 12, 13 hours ago, when Melissa made landfall in western Jamaica. Rokai commenting, wow, nearly a century. Does it indicate we're going to potentially see hurricanes more 4s and 5s, more Category 4 or 5 hurricanes? I'm not sure I understand fully what you're saying there. But in any case, yes, wow, nearly a century. You're 100% right.
Unconfirmed. Post from
Unconfirmed.
@FGD123. Unconfirmed. Severe flooding hits the street on Santiago de Cuba as Hurricane Melissa makes landfall. Heavy rain, strong winds, and waves up to 4 meters high lash the region, with local authorities warning of further danger in Guadalajara.
Okay, interesting. So some unconfirmed reports. Waves of 4 meters battering the coastline here, potentially, with Hurricane Melissa making landfall in eastern Cuba. Looking at a video 7 hours ago of nonstop rain in Santiago de Cuba. Another post 2 hours ago of flooding in Santiago de Cuba. So the flooding is definitely a real big threat here and real ongoing impact from Hurricane Melissa. But anyway, back to the recap of what we saw earlier. Hold on a second, because I want to pull it up. Okay. So here is an extended satellite loop, kind of showing the then and now, almost up till now. This was a few hours ago now. But there you can see the incredible imagery that we were looking at earlier today, the incredibly terrifying imagery. Hurricane Melissa basically achieving absolute perfect symmetry, achieving the maximum potential intensity a storm could theoretically become in the Western Caribbean, and then making that catastrophic, that heinous landfall in Western Jamaica in the early afternoon. And there you can see how the eye caved in immediately upon contact with the mountains of Jamaica, but then also recovering very well not long after the Jamaica crossover, once Melissa moved over open waters again. Lots of lightning activity too, both before and after the Jamaica landfall. So a lot of context given there by that extended satellite loop. And we haven't had much to go on since that landfall in Jamaica because Melissa was so extreme. And Rokai commenting on that video, the recovery is pretty insane. Yeah, I definitely, for sure. Recovered a lot better than I thought she would, especially when the first recon flight into Melissa after she made landfall in Jamaica found that she was much, much weaker than the satellite estimates had her. So it really looked like the mountains of Jamaica had done a number on her, but she recovered very well. However, in the aftermath, the damage that she's left in southwest Jamaica is somewhat unclear. We do know that in some capacity it is absolutely devastating because, it has to be when looking at the confirmed strength of Melissa at landfall in Jamaica, that all-time or close to all-time strongest landfalling Atlantic hurricane. And we haven't had much in the way of confirmed reports and footage and videos of that because the damage and the impact was so extreme for Jamaica that they are now basically in the dark, especially on the western side of the island, the hardest hit side. Also noted that they had widespread inland flooding everywhere from heavy rainfall, just as what's happening in eastern Cuba here. But to go through some of the posts we're seeing in the aftermath here tonight, in the immediate aftermath, again, it's only been 12-ish hours. Intan Barudin saying hi from Malaysia, second landfall in Cuba. Indeed, yes, Intan, we just had our second landfall of Hurricane Melissa, this one in Cuba, right next to the city of Santiago de Cuba, which is the second largest city on the island. So here's Santiago de Cuba. And here was the approximate landfall location. And of course, here is Melissa's eye now. And we have gotten some pretty reliable reports from Santiago de Cuba that severe and major street flooding and flash flooding is ongoing there for several hours before the heaviest of rains of Melissa moved in like they are right now. So really not a good flooding threat at all. And also in time to show you what the National Hurricane Center, the language they're using for this Category 3 landfall in eastern Cuba. They're saying for eastern Cuba that life-threatening storm surge, flash flooding, and landslides and extremely damaging hurricane winds are likely to persist in eastern Cuba through Wednesday morning. So again, some pretty serious language there. Rokai saying it was eye-opening seeing some of the ground raw footage and lives on TikTok. But yeah, so to get a feel for the situation, on the ground in Jamaica, it is not a good one, okay? Many people right now are in the dark, likely clambering through some semblance of debris. Remember, a 185 mile per hour Category 5 landfall likely induced extreme damage, not to just the human-made infrastructure, but also to the surrounding natural environment as well. So here's a report from Rashida J saying almost 5 hours, and this was 4 hours ago. Haven't heard from my mom or sister. Last update, the house was gone. Can't reach my other sister either. Haven't been able to reach anyone in West or Trelawney. I've been crying every 30 minutes. So these are the type of heartbreaking posts we're seeing from people in Western Jamaica who are able to, the few who have gotten word out. They're usually very heartbreaking in nature like this. A report from Chase with Ham stating, as the eye of Hurricane Melissa swept over Jamaica, a metal sheet went airborne outside Savannah Lamar Hospital, narrowly missing doctors and nurses at the doors. It could have cost a life. A stark reminder to stay indoors and keep doors closed. And while I run through these real quick, I'm going to show you another view of that landfall because it was just so historic. And if it is, officially confirmed in postseason analysis, that is a huge deal that we just witnessed the strongest, the strongest and the most intense Atlantic hurricane landfall in recorded history, whether or not tied with the 1935 Labor Day hurricane. So here's a dual high-resolution close-up infrared and visible view of this 185 mile per hour and 892 millibar landfall near New Hope, Jamaica. Craig Crease, PhD, who's not in Jamaica, but said this: "It's far too soon to say exactly what happened with Melissa in Jamaica. Most of the hardest hit areas have zero communication. That means we will likely have no idea the exact degree of destruction for some time." So that is a really good post because that's basically the situation we're in, right? These areas you're seeing right here, right, where the eye wall, this ultraviolet eye wall of Hurricane Melissa, where the core of this buzzsaw came in. Okay, all these areas here, the Black River area, the White House area here in Jamaica, these are the areas that we really don't know very much about because the damage is so extreme, because they're essentially in a blackout now and we have zero communication. So we have no idea what has gone on there, and really worried to think about what we could find. Someone else posted, Karen Mofu said, "Help is needed in West Green, Catherine Hall, St. James. The house is flooded and they are trapped on the second floor. We need urgent rescue." So again, these are messages from people in Jamaica, the few who have gotten messages out on social media. This one from Casey Fennell Shirley: "If you're trying to reach anyone in St. Anne, Jamaica, there's no cell service, only able to send messages. It's only able to send this message out because of Starlink." This person, Mr. Kane, commenting, "Complete devastation in Trelawney, Jamaica." Trine in the city saying, "I don't think people understand what happened in St. Elizabeth Parish." That's or St. Elizabeth. That's St. Elizabeth Parish, Jamaica, which for context is basically this parish right here, where the whole eastern half of Melissa's eye wall came ashore. Trine in the city saying, "I don't think people understand what happened in St. Elizabeth. Houses are completely gone. Families are missing." So these are not confirmed reports, right? We're just reading posts of people in Jamaica off social media, so they're not confirmed or anything. But this is just the type of terrible and heartbreaking stuff we're seeing come out, because we're not seeing much more in way of information because there's no cell service, there's zero communication, and the few messages that have come out are from people with Starlink, mobile Starlink dishes. Is really the only way of outside communication right now for many areas in Western Jamaica. Chica Chica saying, "I am in Black River, St. Elizabeth." Okay, so to point you out where Black River is, Black River is essentially located on this slanted, this kind of jutting out piece of land here, and Black River's right at this corner. They got into the eastern eye wall and not the eye, so they experienced the full duration of the eastern eye wall because Melissa was moving almost due north at the time due to a westward. She was originally supposed to move northeast, but then a westward wobble, which was induced by extremely steep mountains near the coast over here near New Hope, that literally had an influence on the direction of Melissa's movement as she came in to make landfall, caused that due northward motion. So that made areas like Black River here, the Black River area, which is basically on this juncture, this oversimplified line border of Jamaica, and the Black River region is basically at this juncture right here. So as you can see, they got the full duration, really the northeast quadrant, the eastern quadrant, and the southeast quadrant, full duration in all of them. Chica Chica saying, I am in Black River, St. Elizabeth. That is that hardest hit area. She says, I never knew concrete could shake like this. So this was actually during the storm that she got this message out. The 3 windows broken, doors shaking, outside sounds like people screaming or a huge train passing. I am terrified. So there you have it, some of the crazy messages that have come out. Back to the real-time satellite imagery here in eastern Cuba. Inton saying, thanks, I heard from Fox Weather that Melissa has gone northeastward. Yep, that's where she's going. And after she makes landfall here in eastern Cuba and emerges back out into the Atlantic, the southern Bahamas, they got to watch out too. They're going to get hit hard by Melissa. Still a very large, very intense hurricane, dropping a lot of rain. Rokai commenting, there was so much coverage on Jamaica, but I've been struggling to find coverage on Cuba. Again, thank you for the coverage. Well, thank you for joining us, Rokai. Yeah, we wanted to be here for the landfall for sure. Now, in terms of getting information on the ground, we're unlikely to get any updates, I would imagine, here, especially at this hour. But I think it's unlikely we're going to get any real-time updates here on what's actually happening in Cuba. So we're going to have to wait till tomorrow morning to see exactly, what happened and what this is shaping up to be. But Cuba, while not as big of a deal as the Jamaica impact, certainly of the probably I would rank it as the second most concerning area of impact, especially when you look at Melissa right here. I mean, she is still just a very, very formidable, big-time major hurricane, okay? We have to make sure we don't get desensitized by her extreme Category 5 landfall earlier and forget that, hey, this is a Category 3 still. This is still a big, big deal. This is still a major hurricane, a full-blown major hurricane. And a large, wet, and intense one at that. But yeah, so we definitely wanted to be here for this landfall of what was already a historic storm. So again, thank you everyone for tuning in, liking the stream, and commenting most of all. So here's another crazy account here. So this is not from on the ground in Jamaica. This was an account of the Hurricane Hunter. So during Melissa's rapid intensification in the Western Caribbean before she made landfall in Jamaica, twice, 2 Hurricane Hunter reconnaissance missions had to turn around due to extreme turbulence in the storm's eye wall, actually posing a safety risk for the aircraft, okay? So here was one of those stories. So we saw that, let's see, Monday now? Because it's Wednesday? Yeah. So we had that occur Monday, and then right before Melissa made landfall in Jamaica, when she was... Oh, we got an update coming in from Spinny here. But right as she was making landfall, we had another case where a Hurricane Hunter aircraft had to turn around. And so here's this account from which was posted by Colin McCarthy here, which I'll get to it. I'll get to that here after this update. From Spinny. Let's see what this is.
Post from @Jim Cantori.
Oh.
Melissa still a major hurricane, and it will be when it emerges from Cuba later this morning. Then it's on to Crooked Island, the Bahamas, albeit a little weaker, but it's where a couple hundred people live.
Okay. Post from Jim Cantori. He's watching the storm with us. Orokai commented here, there was some footage captured via aircraft of being inside the eye of the hurricane, and the images captured were unlike anything else. Oh, yeah. Here, we can pull that up here on stream real quick. Let's do that here real quick. Now that you brought that up. All right. Okay. So let's pull that up here. Yes, so these videos are from the inside of the eye of Hurricane Melissa. So this was actually before she hit peak intensity. This is when she was a Category 5 the previous day. So this video is from Tropical Cowboy of Danger, Fly Anonymous WX, who is an Air Force pilot with the Hurricane Hunters, and this is a sped up version of his video below. So this was the Hurricane Hunters incept into the Category 5 eye of Hurricane Melissa on Sunday. And yeah, like you said, unlike anything I think any of us have ever seen before. So if you were wondering what it looks like to fly through the eye of an extraordinarily powerful Category 5 hurricane, this is it, and there the hurricane plunges back into the eye wall. And then, kind of funny how that's the kind of like a seamless transition from beginning to end. The video is now repeating. But, I mean, just in there you can see the blue sky at the top. I'll restart it again. So out of the eye wall, there you can see the sun. So this was in the morning. So the sun peering over the stadium effect of the eye wall. Absolutely incredible. There's the blue sky there for a second. You can see it. Here, down here is the ocean floor with the low-level clouds swirling above that. So yeah, I mean, just look at this stadium effect. I mean, this is absolutely bonkers. Like, you will never view a hurricane the same after seeing footage like this. It's beyond incredible. And like Rokai said, unlike anything we've ever seen. Also, not a Hurricane Hunter image, video. This image is just a satellite image, but I mean, just look at it, okay? So this was a Sentinel-2 satellite image. Now, this was not Sunday. This was Monday, right before landfall, when Melissa was truly at peak intensity. This is a Sentinel-2 satellite image, and just let your jaw hit the floor while looking at this, because, again, you are rarely ever going to see an image of a hurricane eye more incredible than this. I can't even still believe it, looking at it myself. And notice also with this stadium effect, like, look at how steep it is. Notice how steep it is, and actually there's something to that. Oh, you know what? I'm not sure I can find that right now. Oh, well. But yeah, I mean, anyway, just look at how steep that stadium effect is. Absolutely insane. And this is the eye presentation of a Category 5 hurricane that is, again, reaching the limits of what you would consider the most powerful storm Earth is capable of producing. That is what Melissa was close to, basically. And here's your evidence right here. I mean, I thought the images of Hurricane Humberto's eye was absolutely insane. Those were taken from the International Space Station. And I thought those were the most insane close-up images of a hurricane eye I had ever seen, of a Cat 5 hurricane eye. And then Sentinel-2 captured this, and there are no other words to describe it, man. That is just unreal. And the worst part, of course, the worst part is though this structure, okay, this storm reaching the maximum potential intensity, really, that the Caribbean Sea is capable of producing, subsequently made landfall over a populated island just minutes after this was taken. And I mean, just try to imagine that. You can clearly see how unbelievably powerful this eye wall is. So powerful, it's sculpted itself instead of that gradual sloping stadium effect that we often see even with really powerful hurricanes. It's just like a straight cylinder, right? It's just a straight cylinder to the ocean floor. I don't think I'm ever going to be able to get over that or the Hurricane Hunter reconnaissance images that Rokai brought up. Inton asking, anyone here in Cuba? What's the name of a Cuban news channel? Don't think I can help you there. I don't know. Sean asking, what was the strongest hurricane to hit Bermuda? Well, let's take Bermuda here. So in terms of direct landfalls, like the eye literally going over Bermuda, the tiny territory out here in the Western Atlantic. Oh wait, that can't be right. Maybe I need to widen my search distance a little bit. Okay, there we go. Maybe a little bit more. So it looks like we have, so on record here, the database, we have several Category 3s that have made direct landfalls over Bermuda over the years. Typically rare year to year, obviously, because Bermuda is so tiny, but of course, there are many hurricanes that go through there. But I believe Fabian, I think Fabian might be the most powerful. 105 knots there. 105 knots here from Nicole as well. So, a Category 3. Bermuda has never been hit with a Category 4 hurricane, but they have been hit with several Category 3s. Of interest, Hurricane Gabrielle earlier this year, if you'll remember, actually became a very powerful Category 4 just to the east of Bermuda. And had she been a little farther west, she would have made a direct landfall over the island, and it definitely would have been unprecedented. Because Gabrielle was a really well-organized hurricane. Rokai commenting, wow, I feel stunned every time seeing the footage. Me too. Rokai saying again, thank you for coverage. Subscribe for more of these coverages. Thank you for subscribing, Rokai. And yeah, we do this all the time here, Back Perch Weather. And we don't do it just for Atlantic hurricanes. We do it for tropical cyclones everywhere in the world, whether in the South Pacific, the Indian Ocean, the West Pacific, the whole world. If there's a major tropical cyclone impact happening over land, we're going to cover it. And this is definitely a big-time major one right here with Melissa traversing eastern Cuba. Only thing is we don't have reports coming in from the ground, right? So I don't, there's not much really to report in terms of real-time data here. Let's see here. Yeah. So we did have landfall here officially confirmed by the National Hurricane Center just west of Santiago de Cuba. Roka asking, how many hours is it expected to clear Cuba? Well, moving at about 10 miles per hour here in terms of the core, the eye wall winds. Generally moving this direction. So maybe clearing Cuba in about 6-7 hours. Approximately. But remnant rain can persist after that. Obscure Crime asking, hey, will you trip if I restream this? I sent your link out to all of my subs, but not everyone gets those emails. Total credit would be given. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's fine. You know, I haven't studied up on the official policies of restreaming, for sure. You're definitely free to, like, you know, take clips of this live stream and stream those, for sure. And yeah, definitely 100% appreciate if total credit is given. Yeah. So continuing to watch this, big time rainfall and very damaging winds in the National Hurricane Center's language here for the impact in eastern Cuba. Again, if you're just joining us, had that landfall 120 miles per hour, very dangerous Category 3 hurricane moving across eastern Cuba. National Hurricane Center warning that life-threatening storm surge, flash flooding, and landslides and extremely damaging hurricane winds are likely to persist in eastern Cuba through Wednesday morning. So obviously with the rainfall, you're looking at this extremely intense convection, which over here is maxing out the scale above negative 117 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's extremely cold cloud tops reaching tens of thousands of feet into the atmosphere. You're right, it couldn't. So those are cloud tops extending tens of thousands of feet into the atmosphere, and they're getting colder the higher up they go. So that's extremely intense convection, and that leads to torrential rainfall coming down here around in this eastern Cuba, in these towns and areas on the eastern side of this island. Let's go back to over here and let me recreate that custom polygon I did earlier. Ah! Again, looking at historical precedent, not that many major hurricanes have actually made landfall down here. At least not from the south. The last one to do so was Matthew in 2016. There you can see his track right there. Sandy in 2012 making a landfall in an almost identical location to what Melissa is doing now. And of course, Sandy was a very destructive Category 3 hurricane for Cuba. So that kind of lends yourself to believe that we could be seeing pretty damaging things going on the ground, even though we don't really have that many real-time reports of said damage. Dennis clipped eastern Cuba down here, extreme southeastern Cuba, and then you have to go all the way back to 1966. Inez made landfall over Santiago de Cuba, is a Category 3. Santiago de Cuba, of course, second largest city in Cuba. But then Flora, a storm that obviously Melissa is not going to be anything like, but a storm, just for historical context, I want to reference here because this was kind of an often forgotten hurricane, but a wrecker of the Caribbean, one of the deadliest Atlantic hurricanes of all time. 7,000 plus fatalities, made landfall as a high-end Category 4 here across the Tiburon Peninsula of Haiti. Then made another landfall here at Category 3 strength over Guantanamo, Cuba. Then slowly traversed eastern Cuba there for days, dumping huge amounts of rain, re-emerged into the Caribbean Sea, re-intensified, had her rain clouds reinvigorated. Again, this was in 1963. Then made a second landfall in Cuba, looped all the way around, and then traveled all the way back this direction. Made her final landfalls through the Turks and Caicos and southern Bahamas before eventually going up here. But obviously, as you could see, between the extreme winds and the rainfall in Haiti, which Haiti always been a very vulnerable area to storm surge, and then this loop-de-loop kind of track in eastern Cuba, Florida dumped unimaginable quantities of rain, again, especially in eastern Cuba. That is, when you look at Florida, this is really their worst storm, other than the Santa Cruz del Sur hurricane of 1932, but that was not a rainfall-driven storm. Oh, excuse me. But yes, that was not a rainfall-driven storm, so we really look at Florida as kind of the grandfather of hurricane disasters, or I guess the grandmother of hurricane disasters for eastern Cuba, southeastern Cuba. Now again, obviously Melissa not going to dump any rainfall quantities, not even remotely close to what Florida did, okay? Florida was like 100 inches of rain. I mean, can you even imagine 100 inches of rain? That's full-blown insanity. So no way, that's not happening here, but Melissa still moving across eastern Cuba slowly, and with all these very cold cloud tops and this very intense convection leading to torrential rainfall, we do have mountains all over the place here in eastern Cuba, not unlike the situation we have over Jamaica. And of course, earlier we saw some of that inland flooding taking place. Again, not quite as extreme rainfall totals here expected, but 10, 15 inches, maybe even more. Isolated totals of 16 plus inches of rain in the mountains of Cuba 100% will lead to bad flash flooding and potentially devastating landslides if they occur in bad areas where there's a heavy population. And Rokai commenting, what gets me is how big the gray area is after the eye with this radar. Shows how much of the system is intense. Yeah, this definitely looks like a storm that is still the powerful, but also kind of the dying remnant of what was literally just 13, 14 hours ago, the third most intense Atlantic hurricane in recorded history. Honestly, from every indication, one of the most intense tropical cyclones that you will ever see on this planet. And here we have some of the statistics from that landfall earlier. So here was Hurricane Melissa. This satellite loop, again, 13, 14 hours ago about. This is what she looked like. Much more formidable what she looks like now because she was a high-end Category 5, an upper echelon Category 5. Extreme winds of 185 miles per hour and an absolutely ear-popping pressure of 892 millibars, which tied her with the 1935 Labor Day hurricane as the third most intense Atlantic hurricane of all time ever recorded. The only other two Atlantic hurricanes more intense was Wilma in 2005. She had a minimum pressure of 880 millibars, and then Gilbert in 1988, he had a minimum pressure of 888 millibars. So that is a very rare company. And then Melissa made landfall near the town of New Hope, Jamaica, at peak intensity. And by doing that, she again tied the 1935 Labor Day hurricane as the most intense landfalling Atlantic hurricane ever by minimum pressure. Also tied the Labor Day hurricane and Hurricane Dorian of 2019 as the strongest landfalling Atlantic hurricane by wind speed with that 185 mile per hour value. Here you can see on this insane satellite image there, the perfectly circular eye, the perfect central dense overcast, the sea, the surface of the Caribbean Sea clearly visible at the bottom of the eye, and then shortly thereafter, the surface of Jamaica there. In terms of the damage reports and pictures that have come out of Southwest Jamaica, the hardest hit areas where you see the eye wall moving on shore there, information has been scarce, and that only makes it all the more ominous because Melissa's landfall intensity was so extreme that you're basically dealing with a blackout of the hardest hit locations, basically zero communication coming out of there. So we've only had these little hints of just a couple of videos and photos, just this kind of basic idea of how bad the damage could possibly be there in southwest Jamaica in some of the hardest hit areas. One of the hardest hit areas, of course, includes the Black River area. And if you can see, that little indent, you see where that land kind of juts out, right? Where the eastern side, the right-hand side of that eye wall and the eye moves across, that's where Black River is. And the reason it's expected to be one of the hardest hit areas is not only that did they get into that right side, that eastern side of the eye wall for a very long time, never getting into the eye, but that was also following the counterclockwise rotation of the hurricane, where the maximum storm surge push, right, the onshore flow would have been. And so this satellite loop right here could end up being in the meteorological record books, because if postseason analysis, we already have the in the moment confirmation that this was the most intense landfalling Atlantic hurricane. The National Hurricane Center did note that, okay, that's a very serious record, and we're going to be looking at it very closely in postseason analysis to see whether or not that's confirmed. But make no mistake, whatever the result of that investigation is, and the National Hurricane Center will be very thorough with that investigation, whatever the results of that is, it is undeniable that the Hurricane Hunter missions into Melissa during the last 2 days on Sunday and Monday were historic. One of the last Hurricane Hunter missions at this moment, right before landfall during peak intensity, dropped a dropsonde, which is an instrument the Hurricane Hunters drop into the hurricanes. They're these little canisters, high-tech canisters with parachutes that float down through the different levels of the atmosphere, recording all sorts of different things. And one of those dropsondes in the southern quadrant of the eye wall, right at peak intensity, recorded a 252 mile per hour wind gust, basically at surface level. So again, that also bars being analyzed and confirmed later postseason. But if that is confirmed, I believe that would be the highest wind gust ever recorded by a Hurricane Hunter dropsonde in a hurricane. We're going to get a quick update here.
Another post from Jim Cantori. The last 24 hours have left us with one of the more historic Atlantic hurricanes in the basin's record. The low pressure and the complete destruction of western Jamaica. Melissa is starting to feel the shear from a large-scale eastern trough, but is still a dangerous 120 mile per hour hurricane hammering eastern Cuba this morning.
There you go. So in the words there of Jim Cantori, just posting this, saying that western Jamaica has faced total destruction. And I see that 17 people are watching here, so if you're just joining the stream, I'm going to give you an idea here because, so again, western Jamaica faced total destruction there. You just saw the satellite loop. Total destruction of western Jamaica. 185 mile per hour winds is a Category 5. Not only inflicts massive damage upon human infrastructure, but also the natural ecosystem. That's how extreme it is. So you're talking about whole rainforests basically flattened, especially at higher elevations like Jamaica has, right? The higher in elevation you go, suddenly those winds go from 185 miles per hour to maybe 190, 195, maybe even 200 miles per hour when you go up in elevation, making the damage potentially more extreme. So when you're talking about that level of intensity that Melissa hit Jamaica with, you're not just talking about massive infrastructural damage and total structural failure of homes that aren't specifically designed to withstand Category 5 force winds. You're also talking about mass ecological destruction, suffering of the local wildlife and ecosystem. Rainforest, huge swaths of rainforest, especially on hills and in elevated areas, flattened. Okay, trees snapped in half like toothpicks, their branches splintered off. Total defoliation, potentially in areas where the eye wall and the strongest winds came across. just, stripping the greenery everywhere. We have had 2 recent Atlantic hurricane impacts that are comparable in wind speed to Melissa, not in pressure, but to wind speed. That was Hurricane Irma in 2017 and Hurricane Dorian in 2019. And in both those instances, they hit Caribbean islands at peak intensity. But specifically with Hurricane Irma, you saw that after she made landfall on some of those Caribbean islands at her at base almost the same wind speed that Melissa did here today with Jamaica, the islands came out. Before impact, they were these lush green tropical paradises, and then after getting hit with a high-end Category 5 hurricane, Irma in this case, and then Melissa here, we won't know that for sure until we get the before and after satellite images. But with Irma, lush green tropical paradise, 180 mile per hour eye wall, boom, boom, and then what came out was this wretched landscape, complete browning, right? A browning effect on satellite where it went from bright, vibrant green and then just literally deathly brown. And that is the vegetation being stripped away and defoliated. Rokai commenting, I like how you brought up wildlife because it's true, it has a good impact on that as well. Yes, and I always use that as an example when we're talking about a high-end Category 5 impact, because I always feel that once you kind of put into perspective the fact that nature, that the natural wildlife is not escaping a particular element of a natural disaster, like that's how you know it's a really bad natural disaster. I brought this up earlier during our marathon live stream, 10-hour live stream during Melissa's landfall in Jamaica. And I brought up this parallel was that, so earlier this year in July, we had truly catastrophic flash floods in the hill country of South Central Texas. Okay, I'm streaming right now from South Texas, and the river that flooded, where all those people died, over 200 fatalities on those July 4th Guadalupe River floods. Well, the Guadalupe River, I basically grew up on that river. I fished there all the time as a kid. So it was very personal to me, going up there and documenting the damage because, I live relatively close by even today there. And when I went up to document that damage, because it was actually caused partially by the remnant moisture of Tropical Storm Barry, one of the first named storms of this season, right? Those floods were caused by a combination of a mesoscale convective vortex combining with the extreme moisture content of Tropical Storm Barry's remnants after he had made landfall in Mexico, right? So that combined to basically create a worst case scenario outcome where a bunch of rain fell on the headwaters of the Guadalupe River in the middle of the night on July 4th, so people didn't have warning, and all those summer camps were filled up because, again, it was the July 4th weekend, and it basically sent a massive and inland tsunami, a 30 to 40 foot high flood wave down the Guadalupe River with incredible violence. It's one thing to say that, it's another thing to see it in person. So when I went up there to document the damage 2 days later, I noticed that in addition to contextual things like these massive cypress trees being completely debarked and bent at 90-degree angles, literally just like, not even snapped in half, just bent over literally at 90-degree angles perpendicular to the ground. In addition to that, there were white-tailed deer. There were deer dead and tangled up in the debris that had been deposited on the side of the river in the aftermath of the flood. And that's when I truly realized just how violent that flood was and why so many people died in it. Because when you take a middle of the night scenario like that, and that wall of water was moving that fast and so sudden that not even the deer, the natural wildlife, could get out of the way in time. Okay, if you don't think the deer could get out of the way in time, you think you could? So that's how that was really put into perspective for me, and that's the parallel I'm using for some of these higher end Category 5 landfalls that obviously don't happen often, and thank goodness they don't. But when they do, I think that's a good parallel, because then it's no longer just about, we built a town here in a stupid place, right? We built a beach area in a surge prone coastline, and then a hurricane hit, and then it flooded all these houses and it caused all this damage, and maybe and maybe human death, but then otherwise the ecosystem is going to recover because historically it's been hit with hurricanes for millennia, for generations, hundreds of years. But when you go to high-end Cat 5 landfalls, it really changes the game. The whole area is just utterly decimated. Again, another thing that happened with Irma, a storm that I have studied extensively, because Irma was really like even though she wasn't like the worst Atlantic hurricane of all time, she could have been in so many different aspects and really had this definition of kind of an apocalyptic marathon storm. And for many of those Caribbean islands that Irma hit, and she hit more than one. Okay, Melissa hit Jamaica at Cat 5 intensity. She's hitting Cuba now at Cat 3, but Cat 3 is not the same as Cat 5. Irma made landfall after landfall after landfall over multiple, literally dozens of Caribbean islands, and some of them endemic wildlife species there actually became threatened because they are endemic, and so they only live on these little islands. And then Irma comes through, literally destroys their entire environment, literally put their populations as a species at risk. So I'm not saying that happened here. Very unlikely, because Jamaica is not a small island; it's a larger island, and also Melissa made landfall straight up. She didn't traverse the entire length of Jamaica. She came up from the south, made landfall there, and so really kind of spared the eastern half of the island of the big destruction, and kind of confined the catastrophic level of damage to the western side. But still, I would not be surprised at all to see some very, very insane images and videos coming out of the vegetation damage, and that is a very crucial damage indicator, especially when doing anything like the National Hurricane Center wants to do in terms of postseason analysis and confirming the strength of the system and all that. Anyway, Melissa continuing to cross eastern Cuba as a Category 3 hurricane, and it's important to note that over 4 hours ago now, there's already confirmed footage and reports of severe street flooding in Santiago de Cuba, which is let's see where, if I can point that out here. Santiago de Cuba, which is the second largest city on the island of Cuba, is right there. Okay, and so 4 hours ago, just from the outer rain bands and the northern area of the central dense overcast, which is now here. Okay, it wasn't 4 hours ago though. 4 hours ago, this area of rainfall was down here, and just from that alone, we already saw some major street flooding and flash flooding in Santiago de Cuba. Now they are getting even more torrential rainfall with much stronger winds, coupled additionally with onshore flow that's probably lessening now, but still very powerful. So if we're talking about life-threatening storm surge, that's what the National Hurricane Center is warning, that areas of coastline here in eastern Cuba could be experienced with life-threatening storm surge. It is most likely to be along this area of coastline, because this is where the counterclockwise flow of the hurricane is pushing the water onshore, right? Over here, you actually might have the opposite of storm surge. You could have a negative storm surge because of the counterclockwise flow is actually pushing water out. But if we are seeing life-threatening storm surge, it would be in coastal areas of Santiago de Cuba and areas to the east of that. And then, of course, the big news here, the big story here is the rainfall. Look at these intense thunderstorms, very, 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 very intense thunderstorms here with these pink cold cloud tops. All this gray, all of this is very intense convection pouring down torrential rain. And the National Hurricane Center has warned like 10, 15 inches of rainfall widespread across eastern Cuba. Easy to see how that's happening with isolated totals of 16 plus inches in the mountains, because we can get orographic lift there and exacerbated rainfall rates and make matters even worse. So definitely flash flooding almost certainly going on, maybe to a widespread degree here in eastern Cuba. And then, of course, landslides of very real risk, and just extremely damaging hurricane force winds, because again, this is a major hurricane that has the leftover energy of what was one of the more powerful tropical cyclones, again, that you will ever see on this planet. That's what Melissa was at peak intensity. She basically hit the maximum potential intensity, which is a mathematical meteorological term for the strongest possible intensity a tropical cyclone can reach over a certain oceanic heat content, right, over a certain temperature of water. That's not something we almost never talk about that, and it's incredibly rare to, because the conditions, all the atmospheric conditions, have to be literally absolutely perfect to be able to support a run for maximum potential intensity. And then on top of that, the hurricane's own internal dynamics have to withstand intensification and not go through eye wall replacement cycles religiously in order to reach maximum potential intensity. But what happened with Melissa, indeed, she didn't go through any eye wall replacement cycles. In fact, she went through a bunch of eye wall mergers, which is a rarer and more complicated form of internal exchange processes. So that's where, normally in an eye wall replacement cycle, a rain band comes in, intensifies, basically becomes an outer eye wall, and that outer eye wall then greedily chokes out the inner eye wall, the original core of the storm, kills it off, and then replaces it. This process induces weakening and an expansion of the storm's wind field. But it does, and even if reintensification does happen after the eye wall replacement cycle is completed, it still results in a period of weakening. But an eye wall merger is different, okay? As the name implies, an eye wall merger is where the outer eye wall, instead of killing off the inner one, actually joins forces. They combine, and while this is slightly disruptive and usually halts any further intensification while it's happening, it does not have the massive disruption that an eye wall replacement cycle does. It doesn't cave in the eye. It doesn't completely change out the whole core. It doesn't renew the whole system. So eye wall mergers rare, but they do happen. And with Melissa, I think it's like it happened 3 or 4 times. And every time that outer eye wall combined with the inner eye wall, it became more intense, more symmetrical, and potentially stronger. And honestly, that is something that I at least always love to note about tropical cyclones. But I also think it's really important to note is that each one is so different. Okay, each one has basically their own kind of different personality and their own way of doing things and their own structure that's prone and not prone and vulnerable, not vulnerable to different types of things. Okay, so sometimes you have a Category 5 like Hurricane Lee in 2023, where the structure is insanely vulnerable and susceptible to repeated eye wall replacement cycles over and over and over again. And then sometimes you have situations like Hurricane Melissa here or Hurricane Irma in 2017, where the structure is kind of in an unreal way, kind of resistant to eye wall replacement cycles and instead more akin to eye wall mergers that during the eye wall mergers just kind of stall out intensity but never truly weaken the storm that much. So you look at Irma and you look at Melissa. Melissa retained Category 5 intensity for an incredible 35 consecutive hours. Irma even longer than that. So when you get these Category 5s that are doing the eye wall mergers, they can unrealistically sustain Category 5 intensity for an incredibly long time. So now we talked about Melissa earlier with the Jamaica landfall and how she stacks up against some of the other storms. But how does she stack up really visually here with some of the most powerful Atlantic hurricanes we have ever recorded? Okay, well, first of all, I'll start off with Hurricane Wilma here. So this is Wilma in 2005, mid to late October. Wilma, the record holder still to this day, as the most intense Atlantic hurricane of all time, with a minimum pressure of 880 millibars, sustained winds of 185 miles per hour, and kind of in a similar place to where Melissa was, a little bit more west of Jamaica, but the Western Caribbean in general. As you can see there, Wilma also had the smallest eye ever recorded of any tropical cyclone at only 2.3 miles across, and it was also, like I mentioned, the most intense eye ever recorded in the Atlantic at 880 millibars. And then you have Hurricane Gilbert here, and a quick note with Gilbert is that Gilbert was actually the last major hurricane to make landfall in Jamaica before today. Okay, so before today, Jamaica had an interesting history with major hurricanes. Despite being an island in the deep Caribbean, definitely in what you would consider Hurricane Alley, Jamaica hadn't been hit with all that many major hurricanes on modern record, really only 4. And the last one to do so was Gilbert, and he did that in 1988, which was a really, really long time ago. And he was also the strongest major hurricane to ever make landfall in Jamaica, and he did so as a high-end Category 3, okay? So that's an interesting note today, and obviously that means Melissa broke the record for the strongest landfalling major hurricane in Jamaica's history by far, not even close. But that doesn't even really matter because Melissa, tied the all-time Western Hemisphere record for most intense landfalling storm. But just a note here, so that was an interesting note there with Gilbert. He made landfall over here of Jamaica Category 3, and then after that, he attained his Category 5 peak intensity in the Western Caribbean, so I just wanted to note that. But Gilbert here, second most intense at the time. Now, since surpassed by Wilma, still second most intense, 888 millibars. Again, Western Caribbean, very similar place to Melissa and Wilma. And then here is the image of Gilbert. Not a full pinhole eye, but a pretty small one at that. A very large system around that. But yeah, you can see that that is just a monster storm. So this is one. Okay, this is the most intense. Number 2, second most intense, and then here today, the new storm that has joined the pack, Melissa here, number 3, the third most intense Atlantic hurricane in history, and the third most intense, the only one in the third most intense category in the satellite era. She's tied with the 1935 Labor Day hurricane, but of course, we'll never know what the Labor Day hurricane truly looked like because we had no satellite imagery back in 1935. So there you have it. These are the 3 most powerful images in Atlantic history. Wilma, number 1, 880 millibars. Gilbert, number 2, 888 millibars. And Melissa, number 3, 892 millibars. And then some other storms that were similar. The only other three Atlantic hurricanes to actually go sub 900 millibars. Milton last year, of course, did it, went to 895 millibars in the Gulf. Rita in 2005 did it, same exact intensity as Milton. Just look at that eye right there. This is Rita in 2005, 895 millibars. And then Allen in 1980 with 899 millibars. So there right there, just ran through the satellite pictures of the most intense Atlantic hurricanes. These are the top dogs, the kings, the queens. And today they just had a new member join, and that was Hurricane Melissa right here. That's strange. Hey, can you guys still hear me? Interesting. Can you guys still hear me? I don't know. For some reason, it's saying it malfunctioned. Interesting. All right. Well, if you can still hear me, it looks like one of my streaming destinations malfunctioned for some reason. I don't know why. But I was getting close to wrapping up this stream anyway. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for liking the stream. ND Knight says yes. Yeah, I for some reason it's telling me that I'm no longer streaming to my X account, and now I guess I'm only streaming on YouTube or something. I don't know. But I was going to wrap up this live stream pretty soon here. So just in conclusion here real quick, if you all can still hear me, here are the last few satellite images that I will show here tonight of Hurricane Melissa. She just made her second landfall. Again, this was in eastern Cuba after catastrophic landfall in Jamaica. Her winds are 120 miles per hour, 952 millibars. An absolutely historic storm earlier today tied the all-time record as the most intense landfalling tropical cyclone ever recorded in the Western Hemisphere. And now today is making her second landfall, or I guess tonight, this morning, whichever you prefer, making her second landfall, this one in Cuba, where serious winds, storm surge, flash flooding, and landslides are likely ongoing and likely to continue throughout the morning. So with that, we're going to wrap this one up. Follow us on @BackPerchCrew on X for continued live updates of Hurricane Melissa and all tropical cyclones around the world, from the North Atlantic to the South Pacific to the Indian Ocean. We cover tropical cyclones worldwide. And then subscribe to our YouTube channel @BackPerchWeatherLive for more live streams like this. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will see you again soon.